My name is Sadie. I am 28 years old from Boston, and I have spent my entire life feeling like a mistake. My parents never shied away from showing me I was unwanted while they showered my younger sister Ashley with endless love and opportunities. Last month, they kicked me out of our family home to make room for her, then filed a legal claim to my hard-earned money. The judge's face said everything when he heard how they treated me. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are from. Hit that like and subscribe button and get ready for a story about finding worth when your own family refuses to see it. Growing up in our affluent Boston suburb, I realized early that something was different about how my parents treated me versus my sister. My father, Richard, was a successful attorney at a prestigious law firm, and my mother, Diana, ran her own interior design business catering to wealthy clients. Our five-bedroom colonial house with its manicured lawn should have been the perfect setting for a happy childhood. But for me, it was more like a stage where I constantly failed to play my part correctly. My sister Ashley was born when I was 3, and my earliest memories around age 4 or 5 already contained the seeds of what would become a lifelong pattern. Christmas morning stands out vividly in my mind. I was 5 and I rushed downstairs in my pajamas, excited to see what Santa had brought. Under the tree were two distinct piles of presents, one significantly larger than the other. Ashley, at just 2 years old, received a miniature electric car she could ride in a child-sized vanity, complete with lights and mirror and more dolls and toys than she could possibly play with. My pile contained practical items, new school clothes, educational books, and a single modest toy. When I asked why Santa brought Ashley more presents, my mother replied with a tight smile, "Santa brings what children deserve, Sadie." That was just the beginning. Family photos from those years tell their own story. In almost every picture, Ashley would be centered between our parents, usually on our father's lap or holding our mother's hand. I would be positioned awkwardly to the side, sometimes almost out of frame. In several vacation photos, I wasn't even included, having been the one asked to take the picture of the three of them. "Stand over there, Sadie, and make sure you get all of us in the frame," my father would instruct, never considering that I might want to be in the family memory too. Despite our family's obvious wealth, I wore Ashley's hand-me-downs once she outgrew them, even though she was younger and smaller than me, meaning her clothes never fit me properly. This required me to squeeze into too tight outfits while Ashley always had brand new wardrobes for each season. "Don't be wasteful, Sadie. These clothes are perfectly fine," my mother would say when I asked for new clothes of my own. Yet the same rules never applied to Ashley. First days of school highlighted the disparity even more clearly. On Ashley's first day of kindergarten, both parents took the day off work, took dozens of pictures, and drove her to school together, spending time meeting her teacher and helping her settle in. For my school milestones, I was lucky if one parent hurriedly dropped me off with a quick, "Have a good day," before rushing off. When report cards came home, the pattern continued. I learned early that academic achievement might be my path to parental approval. I worked hard and consistently brought home straight A's, hoping for the recognition Ashley received for her B average. Not surprising, given how much time you spend with your nose in books instead of making friends, my father commented when I showed him my perfect report card in 4th grade. Meanwhile, Ashley's B in art class earned her a special dinner celebration and a new art supply set. The confusion and self-doubt were constant companions throughout my childhood. I spent hours in my room wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't good enough for my parents' love. I tried being quieter, then more outgoing. I tried helping more around the house, then staying out of the way. Nothing changed their fundamental apathy toward me and preference for Ashley. Our neighbors and my friends' parents sometimes noticed the disparity. Mrs. Wilson next door once asked my mother why I wasn't joining the family for their beach trip, only to be told I preferred to stay home, which was completely untrue. I had simply never been told about the trip. My 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Lawson, was the first adult to show genuine concern. After a parent-teacher conference where my parents spent the entire time checking their watches and asking only perfunctory questions about my academic standing, she kept me after class the next day. "Sadie, is everything okay at home?" she asked gently. I remember feeling a surge of emotion at having someone finally notice, but also fear of saying anything negative about my parents. "Yes, Mrs. Lawson, Everything is fine, I replied, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. She didn't push, but she did give me special attention after that, recommending books I might enjoy and encouraging my writing talents. Her classroom became a sanctuary where I felt seen. Books and art became my escape. The library was my favorite place, a quiet haven where I could lose myself in stories about children who were special, wanted, and loved. I filled sketchbooks with drawings, usually of happy families, where everyone was included equally in the frame. When I was 8, I had my first confirmation that my suspicions about my place in the family weren't just in my head. I was getting a glass of water late at night when I overheard my parents arguing in their bedroom with the door ajar. "She's just so difficult, Richard," my mother was saying. "Nothing like Ashley." "What do you expect?" my father replied, his voice harsh with irritation. "She was a mistake from the beginning. We weren't ready, and you know it. At least we got it right the second time." I froze in the hallway, the water glass trembling in my hand. A mistake. That was what I was to them. Not a daughter, not a person with feelings. A mistake. I tiptoed back to my room and cried silently into my pillow, the word echoing in my mind as I fell into a restless sleep. Mistake, mistake, mistake. The confirmation of what I had always sensed but never wanted to believe cut deeper than I could have imagined. Still, a small part of me held on to hope that things might change, that someday I would find a way to make them love me as they loved Ashley. My teenage years brought greater awareness and pain as the reality of my family situation became impossible to ignore. When I was 13, I was searching through my father's desk for a stapler when I found a folder with my birth certificate and what looked like adoption papers. My heart raced as I carefully examined them, wondering if this explained everything. But they weren't adoption papers at all. Rather, they were documents about financial planning after an unplanned pregnancy, me. With shaking hands, I confronted my parents that evening after Ashley had gone to bed. "Am I adopted?" I asked directly, hoping in some way that might explain their treatment of me. My mother looked startled while my father's face hardened into the expression I had come to dread. "No, Sadie, you are not adopted," he said coldly. "You were unplanned. Your mother and I weren't ready for children, but we did our duty when the birth control failed." The clinical way he described my existence made my stomach turn. My mother didn't even meet my eyes, focusing instead on folding napkins with precise creases. "So I was a mistake," I said, my voice small. "We don't like to use that term," my mother finally spoke. "But yes, the timing was inconvenient. We had career plans that had to be delayed." Neither of them asked how I felt about this revelation. Neither offered any reassurance that, planned or not, they had come to love me. The conversation ended there, with me excusing myself to my room while they returned to watching television. The contrast between how they treated me and how they doted on Ashley became even more painful after this conversation. I now understood why she was the golden child she had been wanted, planned for, anticipated with joy. The difference in how they celebrated our milestone birthdays was particularly stark. For Ashley's Sweet 16, they rented a ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in downtown Boston. There were over 100 guests, professional decorations, a live band, and a custom designer dress for the birthday girl. The event was even featured in a local society magazine. My 16th birthday, just 3 years earlier, had consisted of a hastily purchased grocery store cake after dinner, with my parents clearly impatient to finish so they could drive Ashley to her dance rehearsal. My gift had been a practical laptop for school, while Ashley received a car for her 16th, despite not even having her license yet. Despite the emotional neglect, I threw myself into my schoolwork, seeing academic achievement as my path forward and eventually away from my toxic home environment. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, joined the debate team, and worked on the school newspaper, building a resume that I hoped would earn me scholarships. During these years, I formed a close friendship with Jenna Miller, who became my emotional lifeline. Jenna was the first person I fully confided in about my home situation, and her reaction confirmed that what I was experiencing wasn't normal. "Sadie, that's not how parents are supposed to treat their kids," she said with tears in her eyes after I described a particularly painful incident where my parents had forgotten to include me in their annual family portrait for the Christmas card. Jenna's parents, Bob and Linda Miller, showed me what normal family love looked like. They invited me for dinners, included me in family game nights, and always made an extra effort to ask about my achievements and interests. The first time I spent Thanksgiving with Jenna's family was a revelation. Her father carved the turkey and made sure everyone got equal portions of their favorite parts. Her mother had prepared a special pie because she knew I loved pecan. They said grace before the meal, and each family member shared something they were thankful for. When my turn came, I nearly broke down trying to express my gratitude for their kindness. Meanwhile, my own family had been fine with me spending the holiday elsewhere as they were attending a special dinner at the country club that somehow had limited reservations. When college application season arrived, I faced the harsh reality of my parents' priorities once again. As I researched universities and scholarships, I broached the subject of college funding with them. "We've been saving for Ashley's education since she was born," my father informed me. "She'll likely go to Brown or Yale legacy admissions, you know." "What about me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "There's the state university," my mother suggested. "Or community college. You're smart, Sadie, you'll figure it out." The message was clear. Ashley deserved the best education money could buy. I was on my own. Throughout high school, I had worked part-time jobs, first as a library assistant, then at a local coffee shop, and finally as a tutor for younger students. I saved every penny, but it was nowhere near enough for college tuition. My hard work paid off when I secured a partial academic scholarship to the state university. When I shared the news, my parents' reaction was predictably dismissive. "That's nice, Sadie. Did you see Ashley's solo performance at the recital yesterday? The director said she has real potential," my mother replied, effectively changing the subject. The day I left for college, I packed my belongings alone while my family attended Ashley's dance recital. I had arranged for Jenna and her parents to drive me to campus. As I looked back at the house that had never truly been a home to me, I made a promise to myself that I would build my own life, become financially independent, and never again hope for love from people who were incapable of giving it to me. "Goodbye," I whispered to the empty house, closing a chapter of my life and looking forward to writing the next one entirely on my own terms. Arriving at State University with just 2 suitcases and a box of books, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and liberation. For the first time, I was completely responsible for myself, but I was also free from the constant reminder of my secondary status in my parents' hearts. My dorm room was small and basic, shared with a stranger named Tanya, who would later become one of my closest friends. But it felt more like home than my bedroom in Boston ever had. "You brought like nothing," Tanya observed as I unpacked my meager belongings. "Traveling light," I replied with a smile, not ready to share my family story yet. The financial reality of my situation quickly set in. My scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, but I still needed to pay for the remainder plus book supplies and living expenses. Within my first week on campus, I secured a job at the university library and another at a coffee shop just off campus. Between classes, studying and working 25 hours a week across 2 jobs, sleep became a luxury. "How do you do it all?" my roommate would ask, watching me return from a late shift only to crack open textbooks and study until the early morning hours. "No choice," I would answer simply. Despite the exhaustion, college represented freedom and possibility. I made friends who knew nothing about my past, who saw me as just Sadie, not as the unwanted daughter or Ashley's less special sister. My friendship circle grew to include Tanya, her boyfriend Marco, and 2 other girls from my floor, Zoe and Jade. They became what I had never had a family that chose me. During my freshman year, I took an introductory computer science class to fulfill a general education requirement and discovered an unexpected talent and passion for programming. The logical problem-solving nature of coding appealed to me, and for once I was studying not to prove my worth to distant parents, but because I genuinely loved the subject. Professor Harrison, who taught several of my computer science courses, became a mentor and the supportive adult figure I had always craved. During his office hours, he would not only help with coding problems but also talk about industry trends and career opportunities. "You have a natural aptitude for this, Sadie," he told me after I aced his notoriously difficult midterm exam. "Have you considered specializing in software development?" With his encouragement, I changed my major from general business to computer science and began to excel. By my junior year, I had the highest GPA in the department and was helping other students in the computer lab. Professor Harrison recommended me for a prestigious summer internship at Tech Future, a growing software company in Boston. When I received the acceptance letter for the internship, which came with a stipend that would cover my living expenses for the summer, I was ecstatic. I shared the news with my friends who celebrated with me over pizza and cheap wine in our apartment. I had moved off campus with Tanya and Zoe sophomore year to save money on housing. "Boston, huh?" Tanya said. "Will you stay with your parents?" "No," I replied firmly. "I'll find a sublet." I hadn't spoken to my parents much during college, with communication limited to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional text. I hadn't been home since the previous Christmas, a tense 3-day visit where I'd spent most of the time in my room working on coding projects. But somehow, news of my internship reached them. My phone rang one evening, surprising me when I saw Mom on the caller ID. "Sadie, darling, we just heard from the Robinsons that you got the internship at Tech Future. Why didn't you tell us their son applied and didn't get in?" My mother said, her voice warmer than I'd heard it in years. The sudden interest took me aback. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I answered honestly. "Don't be silly. Of course we're interested. Richard, come talk to Sadie about her internship," she called to my father. "We always knew you were smart." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the validation I had craved for so long, but it was quickly extinguished. "You know your father has a client who knows the CEO," my mother continued. "I'm sure that helped your application." And there it was, the familiar undermining. They couldn't even let me have this achievement without claiming some credit or connection. "Actually, I got it based on my work and Professor Harrison's recommendation." I corrected her, feeling a newfound confidence in standing up for myself. "Well, connections never hurt," my father said, having picked up another extension. "When you're in Boston, you should come to dinner. We can introduce you to some people who might be useful for your career." I agreed non-committally, already planning to limit any contact during my summer in Boston. That summer proved transformative. My work at Tech Future was challenging and fulfilling, and my supervisors were impressed with my skills and work ethic. I found an affordable sublet with 3 other interns, and visited my parents' home only twice for brief, awkward dinners, where they suddenly seemed interested in my career prospects, though not in me as a person. Meanwhile, Ashley had started at Yale, fully funded by our parents. She was studying art history and, according to my mother, having a wonderful college experience, without having to work or worry about money. During one of my visits home, I noticed her bedroom had been completely redecorated, while mine remained frozen in time, still containing my high school textbooks and childhood furniture. By the time I returned to university for my senior year, I had a job offer from Tech Future for after graduation with a starting salary that would allow me to be completely self-sufficient. When I called to inform my parents, their interest was piqued again. "Software development is quite lucrative these days," my father commented. "Perhaps you should consider moving back to Boston permanently. Family connections are important in establishing yourself professionally." Ma'am. I recognized the shift in their attitude for what it was, not a newfound appreciation for me as a daughter, but an awareness of my potential value as a successful family member they could boast about to their social circle. Against the advice of my friends and Professor Harrison, who cautioned me about the emotional toll of returning to a toxic environment, I decided to take the job in Boston. Part of me still hoped that professional success might finally earn my parents' genuine approval and love. "I need to prove myself to them," I explained to Jenna during a long phone call. "I need to show them I succeeded despite how they treated me." "Be careful, Sadie," she warned. "Some people never change no matter what you achieve." I graduated with highest honors in computer science, with multiple job offers and a bright future ahead. My parents attended the ceremony more engaged than I had ever seen them at any of my previous achievements. They even took me to dinner afterward. though the conversation centered around which of their friends' children had also graduated that year and where they were working. As I prepared to move back to Boston and begin my professional life, I was determined to maintain boundaries while giving my parents one last chance to recognize my worth. I found a small but modern apartment in Cambridge, close enough to visit, but far enough to have my own space. I was 22 years old, financially independent, and professionally successful, yet still harboring the wounded child within who longed for parental love. Little did I know that returning to Boston would set in motion a series of events that would finally force me to confront the painful truth about my family and make choices that would both break my heart and ultimately set me free. My career at Tech Future took off faster than anyone expected, including me. Within my first year, I was promoted from junior developer to lead on a mobile application project. My work ethic combined with genuine talent for coding and problem solving caught the attention of senior management. By the end of my second year, I was heading a team of 5 developers working on a revolutionary app that would help people manage chronic health conditions. I threw myself into work finding purpose and validation in professional success that had always been denied to me at home. My apartment in Cambridge became my sanctuary, decorated exactly as I wanted, with clean modern lines and walls covered in abstract art that expressed emotions I still struggled to verbalize. As my career flourished, my parents' interest in my life suddenly increased exponentially. My mother began calling weekly, something she had never done during my 4 years at college. My father invited me to golf at his country club, introducing me to his colleagues with a proud hand on my shoulder, a gesture so foreign it made me tense up. "This is my daughter, Sadie, the software developer," he would say, as if he hadn't spent 2 decades treating me as an afterthought. "She's working on cutting-edge medical applications." The first time he introduced me this way, I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity. Now that I had status and a promising career, I was suddenly worthy of being claimed as his daughter. My parents began hosting dinner parties and insisting I attend parading me before their friends like a prized showdog. "Our Sadie," they would call me, a phrase that jarred me every time I heard it. I had never been their Sadie when I needed emotional support guidance or simply love. "The Thompsons are coming tonight. Sadie, you remember their son Jackson? He's finished law school now," my mother would say, not even trying to be subtle about her matchmaking attempts. Jackson, like most of the sons and daughters of my parents' friends, had never given me the time of day in high school, but was suddenly interested in catching up. Meanwhile, Ashley graduated from Yale with a degree in art history and a solid C+ average. Despite her mediocre academic performance, our parents threw her an extravagant graduation party at the Boston Harbor Hotel, inviting over 200 guests. "What will you do now, Ashley?" I asked my sister during a rare moment alone at the party. She shrugged, sipping champagne. "Dad's got some friends at the Museum of Fine Arts. I'll probably work there for a bit until I figure things out." I nodded, not surprised. Ashley had never had to plan or strive the way I had. Everything had always been arranged for her. 2 weeks later, my parents called me over for a special family dinner. When I arrived, they proudly announced they had purchased Ashley a 2-bedroom condo in Beacon Hill as a graduation present. "It's an investment in her future," my father explained as I sat there remembering how I had worked 2 jobs and taken out loans for my education. "It's beautiful, Sadie. You should come see it," Ashley gushed, either oblivious to or unconcerned by the disparity in how we had been treated. I managed a tight smile. "Congratulations, Ashley. That's very generous." The hurt was familiar but still sharp. I had long accepted that I would never receive the same support Ashley did, but seeing the continuation of the pattern even into our adult lives was a painful reminder that nothing had changed at the core of our family dynamic. It was around this time that I met James at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a software engineer at a competing company, brilliant but humble, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. We bonded over our shared love of problem solving and Italian food and spent the entire conference attending the same sessions and talking late into the night. When we returned to our respective cities, he lived in New York. We began a long-distance relationship that quickly became the healthiest, most supportive connection I had ever known. James listened when I spoke, valued my opinions, and never made me feel like I needed to earn his affection. After 6 months of flying between Boston and New York every other weekend, James was offered a job at a tech startup in Boston and moved to be closer to me. The first time he came to dinner at my parents' house, he witnessed firsthand the family dynamic I had tried to describe to him. Throughout the meal, my parents fawned over Ashley and her new job at the museum arranged through my father's connections while asking James pointed questions about his career prospects and family background. They barely acknowledged my recent promotion to project director, despite it being the reason we were supposedly celebrating. In the car afterward, James was uncharacteristically quiet. "So now you believe me," I said softly. "I believed you before Sadie," he replied, reaching for my hand. "But seeing it is something else. How can they not see how amazing you are?" I shrugged the question, one I had asked myself 1,000 times without finding an answer. "You don't have to keep trying with them," he said carefully. "Some relationships can't be fixed no matter how much one side tries." But I wasn't ready to give up yet, still trapped in the cycle of seeking approval from people who had never shown any real capacity to give it. The situation came to a head when Ashley announced her engagement to Bradley, the son of one of my father's law partners. The 8-month whirlwind of wedding planning that followed was an exercise in excess and, for me, exclusion. My parents spent over $200,000 on the event, including flying 40 guests to a pre-wedding celebration in Paris. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, but not the maid of honor, that role going to Ashley's college roommate, whom she had known for only 4 years compared to the 25 years she had known me. "We'd like you to contribute to the honeymoon fund," my mother informed me over lunch one day. "Everyone in the family is giving something special." I agreed, though I had already spent considerable money on bridesmaid expenses and gifts for the multiple showers and parties leading up to the wedding. During this time, the health management app my team had developed was gaining significant attention in the industry. What had started as a simple medication reminder tool had evolved into a comprehensive platform that integrated with wearable devices to track symptoms, medication effects, and overall health patterns for people with conditions like diabetes and heart disease. When a major tech company expressed interest in acquiring the app for 7 figures, my life changed overnight. After intense negotiations in which I insisted on remaining involved in the app's development and securing jobs for my team members, the deal went through. My share after taxes was substantial enough to set me up for life if I managed it carefully. The acquisition made local news with a feature in the Boston Globe's business section, highlighting me as a rising star in health technology. The morning the article was published, my phone exploded with messages from my parents, relatives, and people I hadn't spoken to since high school. "Darling, we are so proud of you," my mother gushed in a voicemail. "We always knew you were special." The irony was not lost on me. That weekend, my parents invited me to dinner, just the three of us, something that had never happened before. Over expensive wine and steaks, they laid out a proposal that took me completely by surprise. "Sadie, we've been thinking," my father began using his persuasive lawyer voice. "It doesn't make sense for you to waste money on rent when you have a perfectly good home waiting for you." I nearly choked on my wine. "What? You should move back home," my mother explained as if it were the most natural suggestion in the world. "You could save all that rent money and we would love to have you close again." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. For most of my life, they had made it clear I was an unwelcome obligation. Now suddenly they wanted me under their roof again. "I have my own apartment," I said slowly. "I like my independence." "Of course, but family should stick together," my father insisted. "Besides, that neighborhood in Cambridge isn't really up to our standards. You should be in a better area now that you're successful." After more wine and persistent arguments, I found myself reluctantly agreeing to consider it. James was horrified when I told him. "Sadie, no. These people have done nothing but hurt you your entire life. Why would you go back? Maybe they've changed?" I said, not entirely believing it myself. "Maybe they finally see me as worthy now." "Your worth isn't determined by their recognition," he argued. But I was already caught in the emotional undertow of finally receiving the parental attention I had craved for decades. Against James's advice and my own better judgment, I agreed to a trial period of living at my parents' home. I would keep my apartment in Cambridge as a backup, but move most of my things to my old bedroom, which my mother promised would be updated to reflect your adult status. I moved in with clear boundaries about privacy and independence, naively believing that professional success had somehow earned me a new place in the family hierarchy. For a few weeks, everything seemed better than I could have hoped. My parents included me in conversations, asked about my day, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. But as the saying goes, tigers don't change their stripes. And the true motivation behind their sudden desire to have me home was about to be revealed in the most painful way possible. The illusion of my new valued status in my parents' home began to crack within a month. What started as occasional comments about my schedule or habits evolved into more direct intrusions on my privacy and autonomy. "Sadie, we're having the Robertsons over for dinner tonight. I told them you'd be joining us," my mother announced one morning as I was rushing to a meeting. "Mom, I can't. I have plans with James," I replied, grabbing my laptop bag. Her face tightened with the familiar expression of disappointment I had grown up with. "Family obligations should come first. The Robertsons are very important to your father's firm." This pattern repeated several times a week. My parents would make plans involving me without consulting me first, then act wounded when I couldn't or wouldn't adjust my schedule to accommodate them. One evening I returned from work earlier than expected and heard my name mentioned as I approached the living room. I paused in the hallway, an old childhood habit of listening to learn where I stood. "Sadie's doing very well for herself," my father was saying to someone on the phone. "Yes, the app sale. Considerable sum. Investment opportunities." I frowned, uncomfortable with him discussing my finances. When I entered the room, he quickly ended the call with a startled look. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just colleagues," he replied vaguely. "We were discussing some investment options that might interest you." I nodded, not pushing further, but something felt off about the conversation. 2 days later, I came home from a dinner with James to find my bedroom door ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing it. Inside my filing cabinet had been disturbed, the drawer not fully closed. Heart pounding, I opened it to find my financial documents in disarray. The folder containing information about my recent windfall and investment accounts was sitting on top, clearly having been examined. Furious, I stormed downstairs to find my parents having tea in the sunroom. "Did either of you go through my financial documents?" I demanded without preamble. My mother had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but my father's expression remained impassive. "We were just getting a better understanding of your financial situation," he said calmly, as if invading my privacy was his right. "As your parents, we want to make sure you're making sound decisions." "Those are private documents," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You had no right to go through my things without my permission." "Don't be so dramatic, Sadie," my mother chided. "We're your parents. We only want what's best for you." "What's best for me is respecting my boundaries," I countered. My father set down his teacup with deliberate care. "As your parents, we deserve to share in your success. After all, we raised you educated. You provided you with opportunities." I nearly laughed at the audacity of his claim. "Educated me, I worked 2 jobs through college and took out loans because you refused to help me. Meanwhile, you paid for everything for Ashley, including her condo." "That was different," my mother interjected. "Ashley needed more support." "You were always so independent." The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents somehow twisting my self-reliance born of necessity because of their neglect into a justification for their unequal treatment. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach, the familiar feeling of being gaslit about my own experiences. The situation worsened a week later when Ashley and her husband Bradley unexpectedly showed up at the house for dinner. Over roast beef and mashed potatoes, it became clear that they were experiencing financial difficulties. "The museum position doesn't pay much," Ashley explained with a sigh, "and Bradley's firm has delayed his partnership track. These things take time," my father assured them. "You'll get through this rough patch." After dinner, I excused myself to make a work call, stepping into my father's study for privacy. As I was finishing, I heard voices in the hallway just outside the door. "Sadie's doing so well financially," my mother was saying quietly. "If she helped out, you and Bradley could get back on your feet." "I couldn't ask her for money," Ashley replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "You wouldn't be asking," my father's voice joined in. "We're family. Sharing resources is what families do. Besides, she's living here rent-free. It's time she contributed to the family's well-being." I sat frozen, the phone still in my hand, as I realized the true motivation behind their sudden desire to have me move back home. It wasn't about reconnecting or rebuilding our relationship. It was about access to my money. The next morning, my father approached me as I was making coffee, his manner casual but calculated. "Your mother and I have been thinking about making some changes," he began. "The house is getting a bit cramped with you here full-time." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "We're considering buying a larger property, something with more space for everyone. Perhaps you'd be interested in contributing to the purchase, as an investment, of course." "Everyone?" I repeated. "Well, yes. Ashley and Bradley are struggling with that small condo, and it would make sense for us all to live together. Pool our resources, so to speak." The request was so transparent, I almost admired the boldness of it. They wanted me to buy a mansion for the family that had never truly included me. "I'm not interested in investing in a family home," I said firmly. "I have my own plans for my money." His expression hardened. "This is what I'm talking about, Sadie. You've always been selfish, never thinking about what the family needs." "Selfish?" I repeated, incredulous. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 16 because you and Mom made it clear I was on my own. Now that I have money, suddenly I'm family and expected to support everyone." Our argument escalated quickly, with years of resentment bubbling to the surface. My mother entered the kitchen, drawn by the raised voices, and immediately took my father's side. "After all we've done for you," she said, her voice cold, "this is how you repay us." Something in me snapped at those words. "What exactly have you done for me? You made me feel unwanted my entire childhood. You refused to help with college. You celebrated every achievement of Ashley's while dismissing mine. And now you want my money." "We never wanted you anyway," my father shouted, his face red with anger. "You were a mistake from the beginning. But we did our duty, didn't we? We kept you raised. You put a roof over your head. The least you could do is show some gratitude." The words hung in the air. Confirmation of what I had always known, but still painful to hear, stated so baldly. My mother, rather than contradicting him, simply added her own cutting remark. "At least now you can be useful to the family. Help your sister who has always been good to you." I looked between them, seeing clearly for the first time the transactional nature of their view of parenthood. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an obligation that had become an asset, nothing more. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "I'll pack my things today." "Don't be dramatic," my father scoffed. "Where will you go?" "Back to my apartment, which I thankfully kept," I replied, already heading for the stairs. Behind me, I heard my sister's voice as she entered from the living room. "What's going on?" "Sadie is being selfish as usual," my mother informed her. "After everything we've done, she won't help the family when we need it." Ashley hurried up the stairs after me, catching me as I started packing my belongings. "Sadie, they don't mean it," she said, watching me throw clothes into a suitcase. "You know how they get when they're upset." I paused, looking at my sister. Ashley had never been deliberately cruel to me, but she had been complicit in my mistreatment, accepting the preferential treatment as her due, without ever questioning the disparity. "They meant every word," I said. "And honestly, Ashley, so did you when you agreed I should help you financially, because that's what family does." Where was that family obligation when I needed help with college, or when I was working 2 jobs while trying to maintain a scholarship? She had the grace to look ashamed. "It was always different with you. They said you were stronger, more independent." "Not by choice," I replied, continuing to pack. "I became those things because I had to survive in this family." Ashley hesitated, then said what I think she believed was supportive. You do owe them something, Sadie. They are your parents. I stopped and looked directly at her. No, Ashley. Being a parent isn't just biology. It's love support guidance. They provided the minimum legally required care while making sure I knew I was unwanted. I don't owe them anything. I finished packing and called James to help me move my things. As I waited for him in my room, I heard my parents and Ashley talking downstairs, their voices occasionally rising. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone told me they were upset about losing their golden goose. When James arrived, my father intercepted him in the foyer. "This is a family matter," he said coldly. "Sadie is being unreasonable." James, normally diplomatic, fixed my father with a hard stare. "I'm helping Sadie leave a toxic situation. Please step aside." Together, we loaded my belongings into his car. As we were preparing to leave, my mother approached with a final guilt trip. "If you leave like this, don't expect to be welcomed back," she warned. I looked at the house that had never truly been my home, at the parents who had never truly wanted me, and felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. "I won't be back," I said simply and got into James's car. We were halfway to Cambridge when my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "This isn't over. You have obligations to this family whether you accept them or not." I showed the message to James, who frowned. "What do you think he means by that?" "I don't know," I admitted. But knowing my father, he doesn't make empty threats. We arrived at my apartment, which felt like a sanctuary after the tension of my parents' house. As James helped me unpack, I tried to process everything that had happened and the ugly truths that had finally been spoken aloud. That night, exhausted both physically and emotionally, I fell into a deep sleep in my own bed, free from the weight of seeking approval from people who had never been capable of giving it. I awoke the next morning to dozens of missed calls and messages from extended family members, each expressing disappointment in my abandonment of my parents and sister in their time of need. It seemed my parents had wasted no time in spinning a narrative that cast me as the villain. I was just beginning to respond to some of these messages when my phone rang. It was Ashley, her voice tight with anger. "Sadie, you need to come back and fix this," she demanded. "Fix what exactly?" "Mom and Dad need your room for us. Bradley and I lost the condo. The bank foreclosed because we missed too many payments. They were counting on you to help us, and now we have nowhere to go." I sat down heavily on my couch as the pieces fell into place. My parents hadn't just wanted my money for some abstract future home. They had actively promised my assistance to Ashley and Bradley, likely assuring them that my windfall would solve their financial problems. When I refused, their plans collapsed. "I'm sorry about the condo, Ashley, but that's not my responsibility," I said as gently as I could. "You're so selfish. You have all this money and won't help your own sister." "Ashley, I would have considered helping you if you had asked me directly instead of plotting with Mom and Dad to access my accounts without my knowledge or consent." The call ended with her hanging up on me. 3 hours later, I returned to my apartment from a coffee run to find all my belongings sitting in boxes on the sidewalk, the locks to the building changed. A note taped to one of the boxes read simply, "Your things, don't come back, R&D." My parents had evidently used their spare key, which I had forgotten they possessed, to pack up my remaining belongings and effectively evict me from my own apartment. I called the building manager in a panic, only to be told that my parents had claimed I had moved out, and they were there to collect my things on my behalf. By the time I sorted out the misunderstanding and got new keys, I was shaking with anger and disbelief at their audacity. That night, as James helped me reorganize my hastily packed belongings, I broke down, the full weight of the situation crashing down on me. "They never loved me," I sobbed into his shoulder. "Not once in my entire life." He held me tightly, his voice fierce with protectiveness. "Then they didn't deserve you. They never deserved you." As I cried out 28 years of pent-up hurt, I had no idea that my parents' actions were merely the opening salvo in a battle that would soon escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. The week following my parents' outrageous eviction attempt passed in a blur of emotions and practical adjustments. James stayed with me most nights, his steady presence a balm to my raw nerves. I changed the locks on my apartment, revoked the emergency contact status my parents had at my workplace, and met with a financial advisor to ensure my accounts were secure and accessible only to me. You should consider legal protections as well, my financial advisor suggested during our meeting. Given their behavior, restraining orders might be necessary. I balked at the idea, initially unable to imagine taking such a formal stand against my own parents. Despite everything, some part of me still struggled with the finality of legally declaring them a threat. Instead, I focused on emotionally processing what had happened and rebuilding my sense of security. Then the letter arrived. It was delivered by courier to my workplace, a thick envelope bearing the letterhead of Randall Stevenson and Blackwell, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. With shaking hands, I opened it to find a formal legal complaint, naming me as the defendant in a civil suit filed by Richard and Diana Thompson, my parents. The document was dense with legal terminology, but the core claim was clear. My parents were asserting entitlement to a significant portion of the proceeds from my app sale under the doctrine of family support and implied contract. According to the complaint, they had provided me with substantial material and emotional support throughout my life and education, directly contributing to my professional success and therefore deserving financial compensation. I stared at the papers in disbelief, my coffee growing cold beside me, as colleagues passed by my office oblivious to my world imploding. The audacity of their claim was breathtaking. After years of emotional neglect and financial abandonment, they were now attempting to legally extort money from me by rewriting our family history. With the letter clutched in my hand, I left work early and went directly to James's apartment, unable to face returning to my own place where more legal documents might be waiting. "They're suing me," I told him as soon as he opened the door, thrusting the papers toward him. "They're actually taking me to court to demand my money." James, whose background in tech had given him enough exposure to legal matters to understand the basics, read through the complaint with growing indignation. "This is absurd," he declared. "The claims they're making implied contracts, family support obligations. They're twisting legal concepts meant to protect dependents and applying them to themselves. No judge would take this seriously." But the reality was that I needed proper legal representation regardless of how outlandish the claims might be. The next morning, on James's recommendation, I met with Marissa Jang, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in family law and civil disputes. "I've seen cases like this before," she said after reviewing the complaint in her downtown office, "usually involving wealthy elderly parents trying to force adult children to support them, not the other way around. But the legal principles they're attempting to leverage are similar." "Do they have any chance of winning?" I asked, terrified of the answer. Marissa leaned back in her chair, considering. "Their case hinges on proving they provided substantial support that directly contributed to your success. Given what you've told me about your upbringing and their refusal to help with college, their claims are fundamentally flawed. But we need to gather evidence to contradict their narrative." Over the next few weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. My parents had been systematically contacting extended family members, family friends, and even my former teachers and employers, spreading a carefully constructed version of events that painted them as devoted, supportive parents and me as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them after achieving success. "Your Aunt Caroline called me in tears," Jenna told me during one of our regular check-in calls. "Your mom told her you refuse to help Ashley, even though she's about to be homeless, and that you've threatened to cut off contact with the entire family if they don't take your side." "None of that is true," I said, frustrated by how easily my parents manipulated people who didn't know the full story. "Ashley and Bradley mismanaged their finances despite getting enormous advantages I never had." Marissa advised me to avoid direct contact with my parents or responding to the rumors, focusing instead on building our legal defense. We began collecting evidence of their neglect and the disparity in how they had treated me versus Ashley. Financial records showing I had paid for my own education, emails and texts, demonstrating their dismissive attitude toward my achievements, and testimony from people who had witnessed their treatment of me firsthand. Mrs. Lawson, my third-grade teacher who had shown me kindness when I most needed it, was now retired but readily agreed to provide a statement about her observations of my parents' behavior. "I remember being concerned about how they spoke to you, and about you," she told me when we met at a cafe near her retirement community. During parent-teacher conferences, they seemed impatient and uninterested in your progress, despite you being one of my brightest students. I actually made a note in your file because I was worried about emotional neglect. Professor Harrison from my university was equally supportive, providing documentation of my scholarship status and work-study arrangements directly contradicting my parents' claims of having financially supported my education. I remember you working those 2 jobs while maintaining top grades, he said during our video call. That's not the profile of a student receiving substantial family support. Jenna and her parents offered character witness statements describing how they had included me in family events because they recognized I lacked support at home. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their campaign attempting to contact my workplace to suggest I was emotionally unstable and misusing company resources. Thankfully, my supervisor and the HR department recognized the situation for what it was and assured me my position was secure. This isn't the first time we've seen family members try to leverage an employee's success, my supervisor told me. Your work speaks for itself, Sadie. We stand behind you. The emotional toll of preparing for the court case was immense. Each piece of evidence I gathered was a painful reminder of a childhood and young adulthood spent feeling unwanted and unworthy. Nights were the worst when the distractions of the day fell away, and I was left alone with memories that now had to be cataloged and presented as legal exhibits. James was my rock throughout the process, offering both emotional support and practical assistance in organizing documentation. Every piece of evidence isn't just for the court case, he reminded me during a particularly difficult evening when we were going through old photographs that showed me clearly excluded from family activities. It's validation that what happened to you was real and wrong. As the court date approached, I discovered through Marissa's legal network that my parents had been telling people I was mentally unstable, suggesting that my success had triggered a psychological break that led me to fabricate a narrative of childhood neglect. They're setting up a defense based on questioning your mental state, Marissa warned. It's a common tactic when the facts aren't on their side. The morning of the first court appearance arrived with a mixture of dread and determination settling in my stomach. Dressed in a conservative navy suit, I entered the courthouse flanked by Marissa and James, who had taken the day off work to support me. The sight of my parents sitting at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, a senior partner from one of Boston's old guard firms, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. They were dressed impeccably, projecting an image of dignified concern that matched the story they had been telling loving parents worried about their troubled daughter. What I wasn't prepared for was seeing Ashley sitting directly behind them in the gallery. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and uncertainty. The judge, an older woman named Justice Eleanor Rivera, with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order. As my parents' attorney began presenting their case, painting a picture of devoted parents who had sacrificed everything for their daughter's success only to be cruelly abandoned, I felt a surge of righteous anger cutting through my anxiety. Their attorney spoke of family meals, educational support, and emotional guidance that had simply never existed. He described college tuition payments they had never made and cited cultural expectations of filial support as the basis for their claim on my earnings. When it was Marissa's turn to speak, she calmly and methodically began dismantling their narrative, presenting financial records, academic transcripts, and sworn statements that directly contradicted their claims. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and confident. This case isn't about cultural obligations or family support. It's about 2 parents who demonstrably neglected their elder daughter throughout her childhood, refused to support her education, and are now attempting to claim entitlement to the fruits of her independent success. As the evidence mounted, I noticed Justice Rivera's expression shifting from neutral professionalism to something harder to read. When Marissa presented photographs of family events where I had been excluded or marginalized, followed by documentation of the extravagant support given to my sister, something like disgust flickered across the judge's face. The breaking point came during testimony about my college years when Marissa presented bank statements showing I had worked multiple jobs while maintaining a scholarship alongside documentation of my parents' full financial support of Ashley's education at Yale. Let me be clear about this. Justice Rivera interrupted, addressing my parents directly. You paid nothing toward Ms. Thompson's education, yet fully funded her sister's more expensive schooling at an Ivy League institution. My father, unaccustomed to being questioned so directly, attempted to explain. Sadie was always independent. She wanted to do things her own way. Did she explicitly refuse financial assistance for college? The judge pressed. Well, no, but did you offer it? A telling silence followed. The most unexpected moment came when Marissa called Ashley as a witness. My sister approached the stand with reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle of the dispute. Under oath and Marissa's careful questioning, Ashley was forced to acknowledge the disparity in how we had been treated. Did your parents purchase a condo for you as a graduation gift? Marissa asked. Yes, Ashley admitted. And what graduation gift did they give Sadie? Ashley shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall specifically. Because there wasn't one, was there? Marissa suggested gently. Ashley's testimony continued in this vein, each admission clearly making an impression on the judge. I could see my parents' attorney becoming increasingly concerned as their narrative unraveled under the weight of factual evidence and first-hand accounts. By the end of the first day in court, the tide had clearly turned. Justice Rivera announced she would review all submitted evidence and requested additional documentation about my parents' financial dealings, particularly relating to their support of Ashley versus me. As we left the courthouse, I caught sight of my parents huddled with their attorney, their expressions grim. Ashley stood apart from them, looking lost and conflicted. For a moment, our eyes met again, and this time she didn't look away. There was a question in her gaze, perhaps the first genuine questioning of our family dynamic she had ever undertaken. I turned away, not ready to engage with her directly, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling for the first time that the truth of my childhood was being acknowledged not just by me and those closest to me, but by the objective judgment of the law. 2 weeks after the initial hearing, we returned to court for Justice Rivera's ruling. The intervening days had been filled with additional filings, affidavits from more witnesses, and increasingly desperate attempts by my parents' attorney to reframe the narrative. They had even submitted a psychological assessment suggesting I suffered from false memory syndrome, though they hadn't managed to have me actually evaluated by any professional. The courtroom was more crowded this time. News of the unusual case had spread through legal circles, and several observers from other law firms were present, curious about the precedent this ruling might set regarding parental claims on adult children's earnings. I sat at our table next to Marissa, with James directly behind me in the front row of the gallery. My parents and their attorney sat across the aisle, my father's face set in the stern expression I remembered from childhood confrontations, my mother dabbing occasionally at dry eyes with a handkerchief for the benefit of onlookers. Ashley was noticeably absent. After her testimony had effectively undermined our parents' case, I imagined she was facing her own reckoning with them. Justice Rivera entered the courtroom and the formal proceedings began. After the preliminary statements, she leaned forward, removed her glasses, and addressed the court with unmistakable clarity. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in the case of Thompson versus Thompson, this court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the defendant, Sadie Thompson. A small sound escaped my mother, something between a gasp and a sob. My father remained rigidly upright, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. Justice Rivera continued her words measured but carrying an undercurrent of indignation. The plaintiffs have failed to establish any legal basis for their claim of entitlement to the defendant's earnings. Furthermore, the evidence presented demonstrates a disturbing pattern of differential treatment, emotional neglect, and financial abandonment that directly contradicts the plaintiff's assertion of having provided substantial support. She put her glasses back on to reference some notes. Particularly compelling is the documentation showing the plaintiff's refusal to assist with the defendant's educational expenses, while simultaneously funding her sister's education in full, the recent attempt to evict the defendant from her own residence, and the systematic campaign to damage her professional reputation and personal relationships. Justice Rivera looked directly at my parents, her expression hardening. This court finds the plaintiff's claims not merely without merit, but approaching the threshold of vexatious litigation. The defendant is awarded full costs, and the plaintiffs are hereby enjoined from further legal action on this matter." She paused, then added something I hadn't expected. "Additionally, given the evidence of harassment and invasion of privacy, this court is issuing a limited contact order. The plaintiffs are to refrain from contacting the defendant at her place of work or residence for a period of 1 year, after which the order may be reviewed." The gavel came down with finality, and just like that, it was over. My parents had not only lost their absurd attempt to claim my earnings, but were now legally restricted from continuing their campaign of harassment. As the courtroom began to clear, my parents conferred rapidly with their attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. My father's face had flushed an alarming shade of red, while my mother had abandoned the pretense of crying and was staring at me with naked hostility. Marissa guided me toward the exit, James close behind us forming a protective barrier. As we reached the door, I heard hurried footsteps behind us and turned to see Ashley pushing through the departing crowd. "Sadie, wait," she called, slightly breathless. "Can we talk? Please?" I hesitated, torn between the desire for clean closure and the complex bond that still existed between us despite everything. "Not now, Ashley," I finally said. "I need some time." Something like understanding crossed her face. "Okay, but when you're ready, I have some things I need to say to you." I nodded once, not committing to anything, then continued out of the courthouse and into the bright spring day, feeling as though an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself and been validated by an objective authority. The little girl who had grown up believing she was a mistake, unwanted and unworthy, had finally been seen and heard. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life without the toxic influence of my parents. James and I found a new apartment in a secure building in Cambridge close to both our workplaces, but in a different neighborhood from my previous residence. I changed my phone number and email address, sharing the new contact information only with trusted friends. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process. Dr. Lillian Carter specialized in adult survivors of childhood emotional neglect, and our weekly sessions helped me untangle the complex web of feelings I had carried my entire life. "What you experienced was a form of trauma," she explained during one session. "Children are biologically programmed to seek parental love and approval. When that's consistently denied, especially while witnessing a sibling receive what's withheld from you, it creates deep wounds. Working through those wounds was painful but necessary. I grieved not just for the childhood I had lost, but for the years spent seeking approval from people incapable of giving it, for the energy wasted, trying to earn love that should have been unconditional." As my personal healing progressed, I found meaning in helping others who had faced similar circumstances. Using a portion of my app sale proceeds, I established the New Beginnings Foundation, which provided scholarships and mentoring to students without family support, pursuing education in technology fields. One of the first initiatives of the foundation was funding a fully equipped computer lab at the school where Mrs. Lawson had taught, now run by a new generation of educators. When we officially opened the lab, Mrs. Lawson, now in her 70s, cut the ribbon and whispered to me, "You broke the cycle, Sadie. That's the greatest victory." I also established an endowed scholarship at my alma mater in Professor Harrison's name, ensuring that students in situations similar to mine would have financial support and mentorship. "You've turned pain into purpose," Professor Harrison told me at the scholarship announcement ceremony. "That's the mark of true resilience." 6 months after the court ruling, I received an email from Ashley sent to my work address, the only contact information of mine she still had. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she wrote. "For the first time, I'm seeing our family clearly, and I'm ashamed of my part in it. I moved out of Mom and Dad's house last month. I'm getting therapy and trying to understand how I became complicit in their treatment of you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday we might talk." I didn't respond immediately, still protective of the boundaries I had established. But after discussing it with Dr. Carter and James, I eventually agreed to meet Ashley for coffee at a neutral location. Our conversation was awkward and emotional, punctuated by long silences and occasional tears. Ashley had begun to recognize the dysfunctional dynamics of our family and her privileged position within it. "They've always controlled me with money and approval," she admitted. "When I started questioning things after the court case, they turned on me too. Not as badly as they treated you, but enough that I finally saw the pattern." "What are you doing now?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about my sister's current life. "I got a job at a small art gallery. It doesn't pay much, but it's mine." She smiled weakly. "I'm learning to stand on my own feet for the first time at 25. Better late than never, right?" We didn't immediately rebuild our relationship, but we established cautious contact. Monthly coffee meetings evolved into occasional dinners. Ashley was doing the work to understand her role in our family dynamic, and while that didn't erase the past, it opened the possibility of a different kind of future relationship. Through Ashley, I learned that our parents had not fundamentally changed. They had simply found new targets for their manipulations and a new narrative that cast them as victims of ungrateful children. They had apparently told their social circle that both daughters had been poisoned against them by outside influences, preserving their self-image as perfect parents, wronged by a cruel world. "They'll never change," Ashley said during one of our meetings. "They're incapable of seeing themselves as anything but perfect. Dad especially. His identity is too wrapped up in being right all the time." I had already reached that conclusion, and the confirmation brought not pain, but a quiet acceptance. My parents were who they were, and my well-being depended on maintaining firm boundaries, not on hoping for a change that would never come. Meanwhile, my relationship with James deepened. He had seen me at my most vulnerable during the court case and had stood firmly by my side throughout. His steadfast support, combined with his gentle humor and brilliant mind, had become the foundation of my new sense of family. On a crisp autumn evening, a year after the court ruling, James proposed during a private dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. The ring was elegant, but understated, perfectly matching my preference for simplicity over showiness. "You've taught me what real strength looks like," he said as he held the ring between us. "I want to build a life with you, Sadie, one where we both know our worth and never let anyone take that away." Our wedding 6 months later was small but joyful, attended by chosen family, rather than biological relatives. Jenna was my maid of honor. Professor Harrison gave a touching speech and Mrs. Lawson beamed from the front row. Ashley attended solo, still finding her way in her new independent life. As James and I began discussing starting our own family, I faced new fears about my capacity to be a good parent given the models I had grown up with. What if I don't know how to love a child properly? I asked Dr. Carter during a particularly emotional session. What if there's something broken in me because of how I was raised? "The very fact that you're asking these questions suggests you'll be a very different kind of parent than yours were," she assured me. "You know what not to do, and you've surrounded yourself with healthy examples of what to do instead." She was right. Through therapy, supportive relationships, and my own determination, I had broken the cycle of emotional neglect that had defined my childhood. I had learned that worth doesn't come from external validation, particularly from people incapable of giving it. True worth comes from within, from the courage to face difficult truths and the strength to create boundaries that protect your well-being. The journey from unwanted child to confident adult hadn't been easy, and there were still days when the old wounds ached. But those moments became less frequent and less overwhelming as time passed and new healthier patterns took root in my life. Perhaps the most profound lesson I learned through this journey was that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. I could forgive my parents for my own peace of mind without allowing them back into my life. I could acknowledge that they too were products of their upbringing and psychological limitations without excusing their behavior or exposing myself to further harm. And I could build a new kind of family, one based on mutual respect, genuine care, and chosen bonds rather than merely biological ones. With James, with friends like Jenna, with mentors like Professor Harrison and Mrs. Lawson, and even with the cautious new relationship developing with Ashley, I was creating the supportive network I had always deserved. The girl who had grown up believing she was a mistake had become a woman who knew her worth wasn't determined by others' inability to see it. That realization was both my healing and my victory. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who couldn't see your worth? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember that your value isn't determined by those who fail to appreciate you. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve love and respect, no matter what messages they received growing up. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and healing on your own path to self-worth.